No matter how much time you spend working on your game, no matter how fun you make the experience for players, if your game does not look or feel good while playing, people will get bored and forget about it quickly. I started working on my dream game almost 2 years ago, and it has come a long way since then. The basic gameplay loop is pretty fun. You run around and explore randomly generated maps, loot items from crates and defend yourself from hordes of enemies. But still, people got bored rather quickly, and there were several reasons for that. The first one was that the game just did not look good enough. The color palette was very monotonous and only featured desaturated colors that barely caught the player's attention, making the scenery boring and hard to look at. Another reason was the lack of a proper environment around the player. Sure, the game had big, randomly generated maps that should have been super fun to explore, but you quickly got bored because there wasn't much to see apart from some houses and boxes. In this devlog, I wanted to fix all of these issues by recoloring the entire game, improving player feedback and, most importantly, drastically improving the environment by adding several new environmental objects to the map generation, some of which are even interactive. This way, walking around and exploring will feel more natural and immersive in the future. Before we start, please consider subscribing to my channel or checking out my Buy Me a Coffee page to support this project. Thank you, it really means a lot to me. And now let's get right into it. As I said, the game looked pale and boring. Luckily, there was a simple solution: choosing a new color palette and recoloring the entire game. I still suck at making my own color palettes, so I grabbed a good one from the internet. I spent some time recoloring and repainting every sprite, every shader and light source in the entire project. The new palette has a much bigger variety with more saturated colors that make the game easier to look at and help everything feel more alive and diverse. This simple change added a lot to the game and will definitely make a big difference for its future. However, just changing the colors doesn't automatically make the game feel better. Playing for more than a few minutes still became boring, because there wasn't much to look at while running around during missions. The maps felt fake and plain, and I wanted to change that by making the environment more interactive and alive. To start off, I improved input feedback for various actions. I wrote a small script that lets me apply a customizable screen shake effect wherever I need it. I then added screen shake whenever the player fires a gun or gets hit by a bullet. The intensity varies from gun to gun depending on caliber and fire rate. Right now, the game doesn't feature many other moments where screen shake makes sense, but it will definitely find its place in future editions. I also added small particles appearing under the player's feet when they walk or run to improve interaction with the environment. For some reason, this broke every entity animation in the entire project, and it took me quite some time to fix them. Once that was done, I also improved the particle effects when a gun is fired or when a bullet hits an object. The new screen shake and particle effects added a lot to the game's feedback and drastically improved its overall feel. After improving that, I had to focus on a bigger problem that basically broke the gameplay entirely. Look at this. The player walks behind a building and boom, you see nothing. You don't know where the character is or whether there are enemies hiding there. Every isometric game with lots of big objects has this problem. Luckily, it was incredibly easy to fix by turning any object the player stands behind transparent. The mechanic was simple to set up and worked on the first try. I then polished it by adding smooth transitions and a tiny delay before objects fade out. Now you can safely walk behind buildings without worrying about getting stuck or ambushed. And now, let's finally talk about the most important topic of this video: making the environment more diverse and alive so exploring it finally becomes interesting. The easiest way to do this was by adding objects like bushes, rocks and grass patches. But standing alone, they just looked chunky and unfinished. So I wrote a noise-based shader to replace the flat green ground. Now there are subtle, darker patches that make everything feel more organic. Since the ground fills most of the screen, this variation helps a ton to make future environment objects feel more integrated. Next, I wrote a script that spawns environmental objects in random patterns across the map. At this point I didn't have any objects to work with besides some dead trees, so I used these to test the system. It worked, but some trees spawned on top of buildings, so I simply made overlapping objects despawn. Now I can adjust vegetation density and object variation per mission, which means way more diverse map types in the future. Then it was time to actually add new environmental objects. First, I added simple water puddles, and I spent way too long making them look good. I also added oil puddles to add even more variation. After that, I added overgrown patches with tall grass and small bushes, sometimes containing flowers or rocks, but from a distance they all looked like evenly sized squares of grass. To fix that, I wrote another noise-based system so the patches now have random shapes and just look perfect. The grass even gently waves, making everything feel more alive. I added densely and sparsely overgrown versions of these grass patches to the spawn pool for more variation. By this point, the game felt so much more alive and engaging thanks to the new colors, effects and environmental objects. Walking around wasn't boring anymore and the entire atmosphere felt better, but of course I could still improve it even further. I had the idea to add small animals like birds and rats that spawn in overgrown grass and run away when something gets too close. They look a bit funny due to the low resolution, but from further away they work great. After dealing with some cursed bugs, tiny birds and rats now sit and eat in the grass. If the player or an enemy gets too close or shoots nearby, they quickly run or fly away. The rats even pathfind around obstacles while escaping. Thanks to the new environmental details and improved effects, the game finally feels alive. You can almost feel the world breathing around you, which is exactly what I wanted to achieve. Interactions with items, guns and enemies are also smoother and more satisfying, making the game more fun overall. Lastly, I improved some UI elements that badly needed a makeover, like the mission objective text. It still isn't perfect, but at least it isn't just a plain text floating in the middle of the screen anymore. I also reworked the terrible flashy old reload screen. I honestly don't know what I was thinking back then. And just like that, I improved the game's appearance in pretty much every way. There's still a lot to do, but for now I am really happy with the current state. Now that the bad looking game problem is out of the way, I can finally focus on new gameplay mechanics and content, like crafting or new enemy types in the next devlog. If you are curious about the game's future, make sure to subscribe. Leave a like and drop some feedback in the comments if you enjoyed watching. And if you want to support the project, check out my Buy Me a Coffee page. Have a great day and see you next time.